He thought she was just another black woman to intimidate, until she pulled out a badge that outranked his. Before we dive in, I've got a challenge for you. If you believe in justice and accountability, drop a 1 in the comments and hit that subscribe button. If you don't, well, hit like anyway and see if this story changes your mind. And trust me, you'll want to stay until the end. Because the final twist, it's going to leave you speechless. Let's get started. Sergeant Bradley Carter had spent 15 years patrolling the streets of Jackson Heights, a city that, in his eyes, was slipping further into chaos every day. The department, once a brotherhood built on real police work, was now, in his view, being dismantled by weak leadership and bureaucratic nonsense. But nothing infuriated him more than the latest insult, a black woman being appointed as their new captain. Unbelievable, Bradley muttered, gripping the wheel so tight his knuckles turned white. They put one of them in charge? This department is going straight to hell. His partner, Rookie Officer Jake Reynolds, sat stiffly beside him, his stomach twisting into knots. He had only been on the force for 6 months, still learning the ropes, but he knew that challenging Carter's venomous opinions was a battle he wasn't ready for. Maybe she earned it, Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. I heard she graduated top of her class at the academy. Carter let out a sharp, bitter laugh. Yeah? A piece of paper doesn't mean she knows a damn thing about the streets. She doesn't get it. People like her sit behind desks, pretending they know what we deal with out here. The filth, the gangs, the criminals, and now she's supposed to tell me how to do my job? His voice dripped with contempt. Jake swallowed hard, staring out the window as the patrol car rolled through the city. The tension in the air was suffocating, a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. The patrol car rolled through Jackson Heights, its flashing lights cutting through the damp night air. The streets were alive, people moving between bars, corner stores, and shadowed alleyways. To Sergeant Bradley Carter, it was just another night, another shift drowning in a city overrun with criminals, freeloaders, and degenerates. Then he saw it. A black luxury SUV parked neatly on the curb in front of a rundown apartment complex. The sleek, polished body stood out like a sore thumb against the backdrop of cracked sidewalks and flickering streetlights. Behind the wheel sat a black woman in a crisp business suit, her hands resting calmly on the steering wheel. Carter's eyes narrowed. Look at that, he muttered, nudging his partner, Officer Jake Reynolds. That's a damn expensive ride for this neighborhood. Jake glanced at the car, then back at Carter. Yeah, but she's not breaking any laws. Carter scoffed. Come on, kid. You really think someone like her can afford a car like that? Family and politics, drug money, there's always a reason. We just have to find it. Jake's stomach twisted. He could feel where this was heading, and it made his skin crawl. He had seen Carter like this before, fixated, looking for a fight, his judgment clouded by a rage that had nothing to do with actual police work. We don't have cause, Jake said cautiously. Carter's smirk was sharp and cruel. We're cops, Reynolds. We always have a reason if we look hard enough. Without another word, he flipped on the red and blue lights, the sudden flash painting the SUV in bursts of color. The woman inside didn't panic, didn't fidget. She simply exhaled, adjusted her rearview mirror, and pulled smoothly to the side of the road. Carter stepped out, chest puffed, the weight of his badge and his authority pressing down on every step. Jake followed reluctantly, his pulse hammering in his ears. The woman rolled down her window, her expression calm but unreadable. Good evening, officers. Is there a problem? Carter's jaw tightened. He didn't like her tone, steady, unshaken. He had dealt with people like her before, the kind that thought they were untouchable. License and registration, he barked. She complied without hesitation, handing over her documents. May I ask what this is about? Just a routine check, Carter said, but there was no routine about this. His fingers twitched as he scanned the papers. Monica Lane. The name meant nothing to him, but the irritation inside him grew. Jake could feel the shift in Carter's stance, the crackling intensity of a man who had already decided she was guilty of something. She's clean, Jake muttered under his breath. Everything checks out. But Carter wasn't listening. He leaned into the window, his presence suffocating. Nice car for a business meeting, he sneered. You sure it's yours? The woman's brows flicked upward in mild disbelief. "Would you like to run the plates, officer?" Carter's blood boiled. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't cowering like she was supposed to. Then, without warning, he yanked open the car door. The move was so fast, so violent, that the woman jerked forward, her seatbelt snapping against her chest. She barely had time to react before Carter's fingers clamped around her arm, dragging her out onto the pavement. Her purse hit the ground, papers scattering. "What the hell?" she gasped, struggling to regain her footing. Carter didn't let her. He slammed her against the hood, pressing down on her shoulder until she winced in pain. Jake froze, his breath catching in his throat. This wasn't protocol. This wasn't right. "Carter," Jake tried, his voice weak. "Shut up, Reynolds," Carter snarled. His grip tightened as he leaned close to the woman's ear. "You think you can just roll through here, flashing money, acting like you own the place?" The woman's breath shuddered, but not in fear. When she lifted her head, her eyes were sharp, burning with fury. "Officer Carter," she said, her voice like ice, "you have no idea who you're dealing with." Carter's grip tightened as he shoved the woman harder against the hood of her car. He could feel her muscles tensing beneath his grasp, but she refused to struggle. That infuriated him even more. "You think you're special, huh?" Carter hissed, his breath hot against her ear. "Driving around in a car like this, acting like you don't have to answer to the law?" The woman's head turned slightly, her jaw locked in silent fury. "I answered. You just didn't like my answer." Carter's nostrils flared. He yanked her arm behind her back, twisting it just enough to make her grit her teeth in pain. Jake couldn't take it anymore. "Sergeant, stop." His voice cracked as he stepped forward, hands slightly raised in a desperate attempt to de-escalate. "She hasn't done anything. We need to—" Carter snapped his head toward him, eyes burning. "Stay out of this, rookie. You don't get it. It's people like her that are turning this city into a damn free-for-all." Jake's stomach churned. This wasn't just about one traffic stop. This was about power, about control, about Carter needing to prove something. The crowd was growing. Whispers turned into murmurs, murmurs into the unmistakable clicks of cell phone cameras recording every second. The tension in the air felt like a storm about to break. And then Carter made the biggest mistake of his career. He reached into the woman's purse, pulled out a small plastic bag, a bag she had never seen before. Jake's heart stopped. Number no. Carter dangled the bag in front of her face, a twisted grin spreading across his lips. Well, what do we have here?" The woman didn't flinch, didn't blink. Jake wanted to scream. He could see what was happening. The way Carter hadn't even checked the bag properly, the way he was performing for the crowd. "Carter, what the hell are you doing?" Jake hissed, voice urgent, but his superior ignored him. "Looks like you're coming with us." Carter continued, tightening his hold on her wrist. That's when she finally moved. She straightened her spine, pulled her shoulders back, and in a voice so sharp it could cut steel, she spoke words that made Carter's world collapse. "Sergeant Bradley Carter, you are under investigation." The crowd went silent. Carter froze. The woman twisted slightly, reached into her jacket and pulled out a badge, not a civilian ID, not a lawyer's card, a police captain's badge. Jake felt his knees go weak. Carter's breath hitched as he stared at the name engraved in the gold. Captain Monica Lane, his superior, his new commanding officer. The woman he had just brutalized, humiliated, and attempted to frame. Carter's fingers went numb. His once unshakable confidence crumbled like shattered glass. Jake took a step back, his heart hammering in his chest. He had stood by, watched it all happen, and now the fallout was coming. Captain Lane's voice was deadly calm. "I was willing to overlook the traffic stop. I was willing to let the aggression slide." Her eyes darkened, boring into Carter's soul. "But planting evidence? Beating a civilian? That's not just misconduct, Carter. That's criminal." Carter staggered back, his mind racing, searching for a way out. But there wasn't one, not anymore. The crowd wasn't just watching, they were witnesses, and Carter, he was done. Carter's face drained of color. His once ironclad authority shattered in an instant, replaced by a cold, creeping realization. He had just destroyed himself. The crowd was no longer just murmuring. They were talking, recording, whispering his name. The badge in Captain Monica Lane's hand glinted under the flashing streetlights, a symbol of power he no longer had. Carter took an unsteady step back, his mind racing for an escape. Any escape. This is a setup, he spat, voice shaking, trying to grasp at control slipping through his fingers. This is some kind of trick. But Captain Lane wasn't interested in excuses. Her fury was ice cold, calculated, deadly. No, Carter, she said, her voice like a blade cutting through the humid night air. This is accountability. Jake stood frozen, his breath caught in his throat. He had seen Carter bend the rules before, push the line, manipulate situations, but this was beyond anything he could have imagined, and now there was no way out. The sound of sirens cut through the tension, growing louder, closer. The cavalry was coming. The crowd pressed in as more officers arrived on the scene, some looking stunned, others grim-faced, all taking in the wreckage of Carter's career. Lane stepped forward, closing the distance between her and the man who had manhandled her, degraded her, and tried to frame her. "You looked at me and saw a suspect," she said, her voice low, steady, but vibrating with restrained anger. "But I was never the threat. You were." Carter clenched his fists. His body radiated panic. The predator had become the prey. "I was doing my job," he growled. "This city is a disaster, and if we don't take action, it's gonna—" Lane cut him off, stepping even closer, her eyes locking onto his like a hunter zeroing in on a kill shot. "This city isn't the problem, Carter." Her voice dropped to a lethal whisper. "You are." The words hit like a bullet. Carter's chest rose and fell too fast, his breath ragged, his bravado cracking. Jake watched, his heart hammering, feeling like he was witnessing something biblical, a reckoning, a fall from grace, justice striking down like lightning. Then, in one swift motion, Lane raised her hand and gave the order. "Sergeant Bradley Carter," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "You are under arrest." The street erupted. Gasps. Shouts. The unmistakable snap of handcuffs clicking shut. Carter jerked back, his instincts screaming at him to run, to fight, but it was too late. Two officers grabbed his arms, forcing them behind his back, locking him in steel, the same steel he had slapped on so many others. "You have the right to remain silent," one officer began. Carter thrashed. "This is bullsh. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The words cut through the air like a death sentence. Jake felt the world tilt. This was real. Carter was done. The crowd cheered, phones held high, capturing every second of his fall from grace. Lane watched him, her face unreadable, her eyes locked on his as he was dragged toward the patrol car, the very one he once ruled like a king. And then, with the weight of his sins crushing down on him, Carter finally seemed to understand. He hadn't just lost his badge. He had lost everything. Carter's breath came in ragged gasps as cold metal dug into his wrists. The same handcuffs he had slapped onto countless so-called criminals now held him. His face burned with humiliation, his once unshakable confidence shattered beneath the weight of flashing cameras, murmuring officers, and the vengeful glares of the onlookers. This wasn't just an arrest. This was a public execution of everything he had built. "Captain Lane," he gasped, struggling against the firm grip of the officers. His voice, once commanding, was thin, desperate. "You can't do this. You know me. I've served this department for 15 years. I've done more for this city than anyone." Lane didn't even flinch. Her face was carved from stone, her eyes hard as steel. "You did more for yourself, Carter," she said. "You didn't serve this city. You strangled it." The crowd surged forward, voices rising in a chorus of outrage and justice, a mob that had spent too long watching men like Carter get away with everything. Dirty cop finally got what he deserved. "Lock his ass up." "Bet he thought he was untouchable," Carter thrashed, yanking against the cuffs, his breath coming in fast, frantic bursts. Panic was setting in. "This is all bullshit," he barked, his voice cracking. "I was doing my job. I was protecting this city." Lane took a slow, deliberate step forward, her presence looming like a shadow of judgment. You weren't protecting anyone, she said, her tone sharp enough to cut. You abused your power. You brutalized innocent people. You planted evidence to get what you wanted. Her voice dropped lower, a quiet storm before the final strike. And now? You're just another criminal in handcuffs. Carter's legs nearly gave out. The weight of those words suffocated him. The patrol car door swung open, and the officers pushed him toward it, but Carter dug his heels into the pavement. No, wait. Jake, standing just a few feet away, felt like his insides were being ripped apart. He had followed Carter's orders, had let it all happen, had been too afraid to stop it. And now? Now Carter was paying for his sins, but Jake? Jake was next. Lane turned her gaze on him, her expression unreadable, but Jake saw it. Disappointment. His stomach twisted. He deserved that. Captain, he started, his voice shaking. I should have said something sooner. I should have. Lane didn't let him finish. You kept silent, she said coldly. But now, you have a chance to fix this. The weight of those words hit him like a gunshot to the chest. Tell the truth, she said. Tell everything. Jake's throat went dry. Because telling the truth? It wouldn't just bury Carter, it would bury him too. Jake stood frozen, his pulse pounding in his ears. The truth clawed at his throat, demanding to be spoken. But saying it? Saying it would mean exposing everything. Carter's crimes, his own silence, the corruption he had witnessed and done nothing to stop. Lane's gaze bore into him, waiting. The weight of justice hung in the air like a blade ready to fall. Carter turned, his eyes wild, pleading. Don't do this, kid. You don't know what's at stake. Jake clenched his fists, his mind spinning, but then he looked at the crowd, the faces full of anger, of betrayal, of hope. And in that moment, he knew. This isn't just about Carter, he muttered. He took a breath, his voice steady for the first time that night. I'll tell everything. The storm had broken, and nothing would ever be the same. The world is watching. In 2025, accountability is no longer just an idea. It's a demand. Corruption, abuse of power, and racial injustice are no longer hidden behind badges or bureaucratic excuses. The downfall of Sergeant Carter isn't just about one bad cop. It's about a system that allowed him to thrive until he met someone who refused to stay silent. Captain Lane's stand against injustice echoes far beyond that one fateful night. It's a warning to those who abuse power and a rallying cry for those who seek real change. What happens next is up to us. Justice isn't automatic, it's fought for. Do you support Captain Lane's fight to clean up the system? What should be her next step in exposing corruption? Drop your thoughts in the comments, share this story, and let's make sure voices like hers are never silenced again. The fight isn't over, it's just beginning.